theme of this presentation today. So again, this is something we do daily. So the breaking encapsulation is nothing but the way we code daily. So we'll start with a safe harbor statement. Like this is again information about I just gathered during my free time. There's nothing my company endorses on this. So don't take any decisions based on this. Okay. So that's a safe harbor statement. So we'll look at the agenda. So we'll see how differently we break encapsulation first, how Classloaders break encapsulation, and how reflective access to fields breaks it, and object serialization, the mother of all breaking encapsulation, and then we see some of the things about reflective ORM tools. So, and also the theme will always start with it always starts easy, so the coding will be completely easy. But again, once you are maintaining the production code, then you would get into a lot of issues, and then that's the theme we'll be discussing on. Okay, so first we'll get to the definition of encapsulation. As we know, like from our from the college days, which we learned. So encapsulation is nothing but hiding the state of the object and preventing direct access to it. So and one of the most important things is it doesn't expose the implementation details about it, and also checks the state invariants maintained. Okay, so we'll go through each and everything and how these things get broken and what are the implications due to it. Okay, let's start with our Classloader. Okay, so Classloader is something which we are using from long time. Even after the Java 9 is released, people are still using in ClassPath. So what a Classloader does is just actually reads a jar file or a class file and then loads it into the memory. And that's how and any jar in the class path can do it actually. So that's one of the things actually. So when you just drop Spring Boot jar, it can able to read your entire application, sees what your interfaces are and implementations are, and then auto-wise magically, and then it's convenience, right? So everything works like a magic. So, but there are a lot of pitfalls. But let's look at the first example actually. So this is a very common code people uses actually. So it's in the daily workflow. This is a code snippet from REST client REST template. Okay, so the REST template is is widely used with Spring-based applications, and it's there everywhere. Okay, so when you write clients or when you just request something from the backend, so everything works behind the REST template. But what it does is actually internally, as you can look at this code, right, that's a static block in that, and then it always checks whether there is certain files that certain classes are there in the class. So what it does what's the advantages of this is, right? So when you drop in something like a data format XML, right, immediately your when you just say REST template dot URL dot some XML some Pojo, immediately it gets you can start reading XMLs. Okay, so your coding is pretty easy and everything works, no issues at all. But something comes. It has a lot of side effects. The side effects, what happens, right? Let's say when you do request using this REST template, and then you forget to set the content type properly, or there is an issue with your backend also. What happens, right? It goes to, because it's just randomly loaded. So and it depends on the order of classes also loaded. So what happens, right? Then your normal REST template will actually start reading XMLs. It will start expecting XMLs instead of JSON. So what you need to specifically do is, right, if you want to read XML, if let's say your REST template is somewhere global, defined in your bean config, and then if you want to make it sure that it only reads JSON, you should make sure that you go and remove this mapping to XML. And let's say you want a specific reason to have the XML reading part also, then you should go and add this back. So this again gives you like a lot of flexibility, but again, this is pretty hard to track down, because what happens in general programming, this happened in one of the daily work we do. So typically when we just dropped, let's say this jar in the class path, and immediately the classes load randomly, and then what happens is, right, there is no restrictions, right? So immediately everything started expecting XML instead of JSON. So again, the point is that you can track this down. You can see the commits before and see what's happening there, and then you can figure this out. But again, it is completely extra linguistic. You can't really say that why my REST template is always asking me XML instead of JSON. So these are all like things can happen. So that's one of the things. So what is the alternative for this? Well, let's look at the alternative. Okay. So let me go to the source code base. But again, before that, I just want to explain this source code base because this has a lot of things in there. And extremely apologies for the red marks here. I just screwed my environment just 10 minutes before the presentation. Okay, so this all would work with will compile and will build, and I'll fix the environment issue, and I'll anyway add an attachment to this source code post the presentation. Okay, so extremely sorry for showing red mark here. I don't think that it won't work actually. So what we can do is to actually create a modular application. So again, I want to just explain this modular application, what it does. So what it does, it's a simple application. What it takes some data in the form of date and time and some price value. Okay, and then it figures out whether there are outliers in that. Okay, so you can look at it as a streaming data. You can look at a stream of data and then figure out whether there is an outlier. So we can actually implement this algorithm. From algorithm point of view, you can just let's say implement something like Chauvinet's criterion algorithm. So it's a very we don't need to go really into this implementation of this algorithm. But again, you can just understand that if you just give you the price data, this will give you a result of outliers and the clean data. Okay, that's what. So we'll just see how to organize this code in such a way that we can completely modularize it and then build an application which is completely modular and completely non-reflective. That is one of the things. Okay, so we don't need to do any reflective access. We can do for class loading, we can do reflectively scan through the class path, but again, we can do it in a modular way. That's what we're going to see. So let's say if you want to build this application, right, what you generally do is, right, you create we can just organize this as an input. So input is, let's say, the CSV. I'm using as a generic, but just imagine that you are having a CSV CSV reader. Okay, so I'm going to just read some CSV, pass the lines, and then get. So this, let's say, this imagine a CSV data inside, and then that we can have a CSV reader, and then output we can again have a CSV writer. Okay, so we can write to the DB. Let's look at the persistence completely differently. I'll come to that later. Well, let's imagine that we have a persistence layer and we could write something into DB or read something into the DB. And while defining domain, again, I'm using records here. Maybe for a context, if you had under previous presentation, this is a construct from Java 15. So you can actually bundle. You can stop writing pujus and you can write nice records which are quite compact, and it can do a lot of other stuff instead of writing big pujus. Okay, that's one thing. So you can define the domain here, and then let's imagine that we are having one service, and imagine that this is a command line application, and I'm taking processing some commands, and I'm going to use this service. So this command, you can just replace this with a service. Everything is organized in a proper way. You can use it as a command line tool, or you can just push it in the class, as a server machine. Just add a service layer, and you can do it. Okay, so that is something we could think. So let's look at the service. So it just says I'm taking the input and taking the output, and I'm going to process the outliers, and it's going to spit out. So if you want to organize this code, so there are three, as you can see, right? There is an input reader. It's a classic Java service application which we write daily coding. Okay, so but we have an output writer, and also we have the algorithm. So to organize this, generally what we do, we just put an auto void here. Okay, so for Spring based applications, but instead of that, we can actually use a service loader. Okay, so the service loader, what it does, it actually scans through your entire class path and also the module path. Okay, so for a context, right, class path is completely linear. Any jar can work anyway, but a module path contains a complete module graph, which means you have to specifically say that this module depends on common client, common math. This is the ORM tool I'm going to use, and I'm going to use Hickory. and I'm using SQL from extra part from the JDK. So only this uses only Java base and Java SQL. So you can see you don't need to use any other thing. You can only use this one. So you're already defining apart from your dependencies which you are mentioned in your Gradle build file. Okay, I guess I'll come to this Gradle build file actually later. So you have defined the implementation here, but you got to go and again define that I'm going to use so and so modules from that. Okay, so that is, these are all like all automatically generated unnamed modules. IDE completely supports everything. The latest IDE, you can build complete modular applications without any support, and Gradle integrates perfectly compared to Maven, because I've not tried Maven. Maven is looks pretty harder actually. So as you can see this application thing, right? I'm using something called as a service load. And I'm saying this fine first because if you look at the Spring analogy, right? Unless you mention a qualifier name, it will get the actual first IMPL it looks for, right? So it will look. So how am I wiring this information? I'm wiring this information here. Okay, so I'm using say provides input reader and for this input reader, I'm having a CSV reader. This is my implementation. So I'm clearly defining this is going to be my implementation with a very logical syntax. And the most important part is, right, the service loader walks through the module graph and then figures out the CSV reader. So let's say the CSV reader is in the some other module also, right? You just need to say require some other module, and then you can just wire this. So there is no random class path, random class loading anywhere in the tool. Okay, so there is no what do you say, right? Like if let's say you use Spring Boot here, right? This might stop working, and also you have to give a lot of flags like allow reads and allow what you say, allow break-ins and all other stuff you can do. You can still do it actually, but what happens is, right, the Spring actually randomly loads classes from anywhere. But for the service loader, it always loads from the boot, from the Java base. So from the Java base, it could look at the entire graph. So you can see this one of the edge, this one of the edge, this one of the edge. It could look at the entire graph and then see where I'm actually loading a class from. So this gives you a lot of security compared to randomly loading classes. One, and also it can give you a lot of logical sense that how my classes are getting loaded. Yeah, I'm going to write another line of code here, but again, that is well worth the problems which you're going to face without knowing what's happening in the entire class path. That is one, because if you give an access to Classloader to load anywhere, then it creates problem. Okay, so that is one of the way Classloader generally breaks encapsulation, and you can solve this breaking encapsulation of the class loader by using service loader. So that is one thing, and you can build a very self-sustaining complete app which is mostly loose coupled, and it is almost follows the spring way of doing things, and we could organize tests and everything along with it without worrying about any other stuff. And also you can do it within the IDE itself. And I'm not using any dependency injection tools, nothing, just the built-in service loader could be used to it. But there are only one slight disadvantage of using the service loader, because service loader always expects you to have a non-zero or constructor. So problem is, like, when I want to load a service loader, I need to make sure that I have my constructor always. So I don't have a constructor here. So in general, I can't have a constructor saying path data server. Okay, so that is something is a limitation here, but that's the only biggest limitation I can see. So you can use this along with other dependency injection frameworks, maybe something built later, or there is compile time dependencies offered by some other dependency injection frameworks also. So that can be done. But the limitation of service loader is that I cannot use a non-zero R constructor. But if you're able to organize the code without it, you can typically do within the JDK itself. So that is one thing I want to add. And let me go and explain this build or Gradle file. Okay, so build, again, I'm having these dependencies, which is anyway, this will be reflected in the module info. And one thing I've added I have to add the enable preview. If you are in Java 16, I don't think so you need to add, because the records are all completely there. And again, this enable preview I need to add. And there is something I have also had, something called the J-Link plugin. Okay. So in the J-Link plugin, what this J-Link plugin does is that it takes all my unnamed modules is all the jars, and then it creates a master modular complete, compresses every jar into a single module, creates one module descriptor, and then patches your module info. So sorry. So what in turn you can use it, right? You can build a complete application and your modular application, instead of actually only modular in the JDK itself, you can build a complete modular application along with dependencies which are not modularized. Okay, so all these dependencies are not modularized. Okay, so you can't expect every developer to go and add a module info here. So without that, also you can actually modularize the entire application. And then I'll give you the size of my build. Give me a second. So this is my code actually, and then I have a build here, and then this is my image which is generated. And this is 55 MB, including everything, including my application, my dependencies, as well as the JVM, which is Java 15 actually. So that is, if you just download the Java 15 JVM itself is 200, 300 MB. And then you can put it in cloud, or you can put it in Lambda, or whatever the funky you can get. So that's something. Here actually I'm still having, you can see there is an outlier detector command line tool also is created, where you can actually use the main program and directly execute this code. And also you can actually strip all this data out. I have not done that. So you can only build with the outlier detector / outlier detector, and you can remove everything else. Okay, so that is something we could do. So this is a complete walkthrough. So I will share this application once I fix this, some minor steps. I will share this application. You can take it as a template and you can build on your own. Okay, so that is something we could do. So let's go back to the presentation. So one thing which we discussed is from the current slide. Okay, so as we discussed, right, random class loading has its own issue. Okay, so as we see, we are fixing using service loaders. Service loaders actually again go with the sits in the base module, and it can look at the entire module graph and load the class safely compared to class loader loading classes randomly. Again, we'll go to a security issue when we start loading random class loaders also later actually. Okay, so again we'll go to the another important thing which we do. Generally, what we do is, right, if you want to copy properties, what we use, this is something not a lot of people uses, especially in the Spring world. This is a bean utils is part of common bean utils library, where you can actually copy the properties from directly from one object to other object. So what this actually does is, right, it actually reflectively reads through the entire let's say there is a model or an entity. It goes through each and every fields, then it just copies it, and then it just looks at the new object, creates the new object without any constructor, and then stuff the value into it. So that's how the internet works. So let's say if I add something which I don't want to copy it, right, I have to go and say exclude like this. So I don't want to copy created date or updated date, something like that. Or if I do something in later, if I want to change, I have to go and say you have to exclude this. So you see the convenience of doing this. Instead of doing this, you have to either use Mapstruct. There is an application, there is a tool called Mapstruct we can use to do it. And or you have to do hand using free builder or something. You can directly build it hand-wise. So the problem, this is actually one-line code, pretty simple, but from a coding perspective, you lose the compiler's ability. And from a security perspective, I'll come to the security perspective for that actually. So we are not using any variable change it doesn't result in a compiler error. So let's look at a security issue just on this Apache common base utils. Okay, so what happens in this CVE, right? What happens? There is I'll show you the fix actually. Maybe I'm sorry because I took this out, but there was a problem here. Okay, so what is the fix they have done to fix this? I'll explain the security issue first. So one, what happens like when there is this class is getting copied, there is a class value also in every object, right? So you can see that you can say get class. Okay, so any object you create, you can say get class, and from the get class, you can say get class loader also. So you can typically get the class loader anywhere. But this code looks harmless because we are this code looks okay. So this code looks harmless because we are actually using somewhere internally. But let's imagine that this is going to be a deserialization. Okay, so I'm using I'm using common beans utils as a part of my deserialization of my or external JSON value. Okay, so the externally you are submitting a JSON value from the external world, and there are tools, especially within Spring, which uses this bean utils to actually copy an object from one model to another model, and then it stuffs the value into it without actually checking anything. But so what there are instances in which you can actually capture the class property of the available Java objects. So what happens, right? So once you have a class property, you can typically get hold of the class loader and you can load random classes into the memory. And if you look at this, the problem is known as a mad gadget issue. Okay, so what this mad gadget issue does is that if you have a normal if you have, let's say, a Pojo, and then there is a known what do you say a subclass which could completely spoof it, and you can actually load this mad gadget into the class loader and then start executing commands externally. So let's imagine that you are sending a JSON file which has commands into it, and then that command is going to get executed into your application. So this actually a 0-day bug which happened in both Oracle WebSpheres and WebLogic, which are, as you can see, these are all proper web frameworks which are used to do daily applications. So you can typically hack, who knows how this exploit will result in what you can take data out, or you can spoof a transaction, or you can do anything with that actually. So those are all the problems associated with copying. So reflectively copying stuffs. You have copied the class file also, class variable also. Okay, so what the actual fix they have done here, right? As you can see the fix. So here, after the fix, what they have done, if you just take the class, if you just get the class property, you can say it will just say could not access the class property. Okay, so the fix they have done to actually solve this, but you should make sure that you should upgrade to common builds 1.9.4. So anybody go to your application and you see 1.9.2, you are vulnerable actually. So you're vulnerable to this kind of attacks, but you never know. It might be somebody will exploit it or not. That's a different problem. But you are vulnerable to this attack. And more often we should be concerned with this type of attacks, in the sense because we are moving to a world where we are not going to deploy all our applications just behind the very firewall. So your normal IoT applications or something like that might be externally facing actually. And all these the problems of external world, people trying to do code injection or SQL injection and command injection, everything are bound to open when you use reflective based frameworks actually. And because of the inherent property that you are not using any invariants and you are actually copying the actual property directly and stuffing into the other fields. Okay, so that's one of the problems having this this using this common beans utils actually. So the alternative to it is use Free Builder. So Free Builder, again, people that are used it, it's a non-reflective code gen based tool. So any alternative for reflective access would be code gen in first place. And also you can use the new formats of records, which is far easier to write code rather than so as you can see, this is so simple, right? Like I just mentioned local date and then date and price, and then that's it. I don't need any getters, setters, everything, and everything is auto generated by the compiler itself. So I'm not doing anything else, and nobody can actually go into. And also I'm checking the invariants also here. So let's say this is the most important thing, right? If the date is after local data now, then date is later. So don't use it. So I'm not using a future date. So this is actually like a constructor invariants which I'm building actually. So the invariants are quite important, and we'll see why invariants are quite important actually as we go through. So yeah, object serialization. We have come back to the to the root of the problem of all why security engineers have their jobs is due to because of object serialization. Simple. So that's a full-time employment, as Brian Gates in one of his presentation would have explained is object serialization is a full-time employment act for vulnerability engineers. Okay, so that is the reason why tools exist. That's the reason why you need to upgrade your common beans tools also, because object serialization is so shitty. Okay, so what happens in object serialization is that you have an object graph in the memory, and let's say you have price data or whatever the POJO we have laid it out in the memory, and then it will go through each and every variable and scrap the value out of it. Okay, so and it actually saves it in any other format. So again, when we say that object serialization has some issues, you should not really say I'm going to change JSON with default serialization or XML or something like that. Everything, the wire encoding might have its own issue, but again, the way the objects are scraped out and put back also has the major issue while dealing with security issues actually. So, and also this was very important in the sense like it replaced very error-prone state saving code actually, because prior to the use of object serialization, right? People used to write their own way of actually how to remove the take the state of the execution in the memory and then write it to a file. So it was very error-prone, and then let's say there is some changes in the way you want to write the file, then you have to rewrite everything actually. So and one of the important thing object serialization solved, right? It just implements serializable, it's magic, and every object can be serialized, and it could actually support cycles also. That's one of the problems with JSON actually doesn't support cycles, in the sense like if you object serialization actually supports cycles. Let's say you are saying page, and then you have another page inside that, and then the page refers to the other one. So as you can see, I'm just mentioning object graph cycles. Okay, so object graph cycles also supported by graph serialization, object serialization currently actually. But JSON doesn't support it, and we are very quite okay with using for all communication all around the world. So mechanics again. So again, the mechanics of this thing is, right, it actually goes reflectively reads every variable, and then it will even, that's what we even read any private variables also. We don't care about final variables, we don't care about private variables. We actually take all the variables out, and then it also writes back reference to the previously seen object, so that it doesn't write it back actually, and recursively does each and every time it recursively does into a JSON object or whatever the wire encoding we have. But let's see what are the things which undermines actually. So let's say thread safety. So we are implementing something like a safe map, which implements a serializable. And so what we have is, right, we have an insert and remove. Okay, so this insert and remove are the guard against this internal state of the map being synchronized, in the sense like otherwise it's not a synchronized, it's not a safe map, it's completely unsafe map in a multi-threading environment. Okay, so but what happens while using object serialization, in the sense that we use serialization actually stuff private method called as write object, and it will actually write the map. So the point is, right, you are removed the invariants of, sorry, you are not using the invariants of insert and remove, and you are just throwing away this guard and then accessing directly the map internal state. And while deserialization also, it takes the value from the external world, and then without any synchronization it will actually put back into the map. Okay, so that's one. So thread safety goes out of the window if you directly serialize this time, but this type of application, so which we need to be very ensure while we're writing serialization. So and also another one is invariant. So the invariance examples I already showed. So let's say there is a range, we have start and we have end. And while we are actually always checking whether start is greater than end. So if the start is greater than end, then only if start is greater than, we throw an illegal argument exception. But this works, this doesn't work in a deserialization environment, in the sense like this value of start and end will directly get stuffed. To try to deserialize this, actually it won't work. This illegal argument exception won't work, in the sense like it will not check the invariance at all. So that's the problem. So you lose invariance because you have thrown the constructor out. So serialization works by actually magically creating a constructor and then stuffing values into it instead of actually using the default constructor for that. So again, malicious subtypes is something, the example we saw even before actually. So this is even an easier example I could show. So let's say we have a date holder which implements a serializable. We have a date field called date. Okay, so and then we have a constructor called constructor we are using. And again, you should always guard against the external value. Okay, so that's the whole point of when we create a secured application. You should always think about why when you're passing an external world variable, whether we need to really you need to be careful on this. So what we do is we don't take the value directly. We do a defensive copy of it. So we take the time and then create a new date, and then we save it actually. So and also we do another check if it's a valid date or not. If so, let's say some you are giving some random date from an input which is not a valid date at all, then you can again throw an illegal argument exception. So again, so if you say again, let's say we have the deserialized stream out there. We have had that, but let's say we can tamper the data. Let's say we use the objects like Java's default serialization value, and you can go and tamper this date holder and then create another extended version of it, saying the son of date get time, and then I'm just going to send a random int. Okay, and this will completely get passed. So that's the problem. So the problem is like if you, because again the magic of the invariant checking in the constructor is not happening. You are creating a constructor out of thin air and then stuffing values into it. So again, you will actually be stuffed into something like new random new next instead of the actual date. Okay, so what happens is, okay, you can write more defensive code for this, and you can look at the effective Java. And I forgot the actual part in this deal. You are always encouraged to write a read object and write object while you implement a serializable. Okay, but let's say we implement a read object, and then what you do, we actually use the default read object. Okay, so we are from the object input stream, and then again we do a defensive copy of that, let's say to be safe on that, and then check whether this is invalid. So this will actually get caught. So if you implement the read object, this will get completely caught. Okay, so that is, but you should remember to implement this actually, and nobody will. So that's some, because the problem is what we are doing is extra linguistic. So the term used even by Brian White said, right, serialization is completely extra linguistic in the sense like you are not able to reason the code by just looking at it. So when I say implement serializable, and if you just read this code, you are expecting when we deserialize also this constructor is getting called, but ultimately the constructor will never get called. Okay, so because because that's the problem actually. You can't deduce the correctness of the code by reading it. But if you can't judge the correctness of the code just by reading into it, you can never look at the security aspect also. Okay, so that's another inference from that. So you can't reason the security aspect of this code if you can't even understand whether the correctness of the code actually. So that is another implication of this type of problem. Okay, let me see what I'm. Okay. So again, so you can even screw up more actually. You can actually implement a finalizer variable, finalizer somewhere to this object, and then maybe the sub objects, maybe this would implement another finalizer for, and let's say this, you are actually able to load this object, and then finally it says it's invalidate, throw an invalid object exception. But while cleaning up the resource, you can actually steal the object again. Okay, so there's all so many weird issues you can actually get into while reading and writing objects logically actually. So these are all this code would have been probably implemented in your serializable framework like a FastXML or like your Jackson parser. Everybody would have written it, and then they would have written a lot of defensive code to actually solve all these security issues actually. So again, the problem will come to the aspect of this. Magic is always dangerous. Okay, so again, people won't reason extra linguistic behavior. So when we can't even deduce the correctness of the code while we're reading it, you cannot completely look at the security aspect of that code. And the most important problem is, right, let's say even though you use serializer also, let's say how do we actually build this code actually? So let's say if you want to do an object mapper or something like that, right, we actually construct this value using this constructor. Or we'll say date holder equal to new date holder, and then that will actually check the invariants while we send the data out, right? And then we'll just say object mapper dot write date holder. Okay, so so we are giving all the importance of invariance checking while we are writing the code out. But the most important part is reading part actually, because while you read the code, read the external JSON file, that has all the devils in that actually. So while you are actually sending the data out correctly, but while you are reading it, you are completely open to the problems of the external world. Who knows who's going to mount an attack on your application? So that is the problem. And again, the final statement I want to make. So the way forward. So what the JDK guys are also doing about this actually, they are insisting the class also should also have some control over the design of the offline representation of the code. So what we are not worried about the offline representation at all. So we are just saying give class object. I'm going to serialize the entire state of the object. And I'm not going to tell you how to do it, or I'm not going to give you any instruction about how the offline representation should look like. So that is one of the thing of just saying implement serializable, which is magic, but it's dangerous. So that's the problem. Okay, so the author should be in control of the deserialized form, and validation should be done both while creating as well as reading the object. So that's what writing the object to the external world, and from the reading the object from the external world. And also always make sure that the deserialization always go through a standard constructor, and mostly it should be written in plain Java code, because plain Java code is something it could be code review. Okay, so because nobody could pick this up in a code review. Okay, so because code review we are generally used to doing in just reading the code rather than trying to execute it. We don't generally try to execute it. We read this code and we can say this is a perfectly valid code and it has security issues. No, so unless people who know about this, or or they know about this current scenario, they can't reduce it's a wrong code actually. That's what that's the problem of Excel linguistic. So you need to know something apart from the language to actually deduce the correctness of this code. So that's the problem with the default serialization right now. So what they are doing, so the current JDK, this is actually under implementation. I'm not sure when this is going to get implemented, but there's a very nice paper written by Brian Gertz on that. You can go take a look at it, and some of the examples are also from the paper. So we have a point. So let's say X and Y, same thing. You are using a constructor to create this, but what you're going to do in the future is also you're going to create a deconstructor also. What is a deconstructor? Deconstructor is nothing but you are supplying the values, you're supplying the variables, but you are stuffing the internal state into the external variables. So this is currently implemented in pattern matching, where you can actually stuff the external internal state of an object into an external variable. So this currently implemented, and the same pattern is going to get used for this model also. Okay, so you have a constructor patterns as well as a deconstructor pattern. And what you can see is right here, while implementing the serializer. Okay, so we are again and also the other important thing what they want to implement is implement annotations called like serializer as well as deserializers. Okay, so while serializer, you are knowing that what is the external pattern you're going to represent to the world, which is like I'm going to give the low and high. Let's say is the range. You have the invariant checking also here, and I'm going to represent the external world to the low and high. But while deserializing, I'm actually going through the constructor. And let's say your fast XML, your JSON parser, and all the parsers in the world should read this annotation instead of actually going reflectively stuffing values into the value. So this is going to be the future way of doing it. And one of the things which I think the current records projects has been implementing is try to automate this in the records itself. So instead of you writing this pattern matching, while you write a record in the sense like when you create so when you create this price data as a record, it will automatically does the serializer and deserializers for you using this invariance. That's what the current work which is being done, if I'm correct on that actually. So that is the, yeah. So let's go back to the presentation. Okay. So yeah, so that is instead of you writing it, let's the record actually writes for you. So this will ensure that we have safe serialization and we don't need to worry about so many deserialization bugs. So because when you look at the actual security issues, right? 70-80% of the real problems are due to deserialization. Okay, so it will create a hell of a lot of problems in, say, SQL injection, code injection, and most of the data breaches in the world is also taken place by improper deserialization. Current data breaches which have been happened in the whole world. Okay, again, I'm going to go to another area of ORM tools. Generally, we are very good in writing Hibernate code, which is pretty easy because, but again, it's a very highly reflective code actually. So when you write a Pojo class, what happens is, right, when the Pojo actually sits inside the transaction, it behaves a completely different way. And when you put the Pojo outside the transaction, it works in a different way. Let's say you have some entity and then you want to say get something below. A normal Pojo will be like nothing but you can just say get my sub entity or something like that. But when you actually do inside a transaction, it is going to create a left join variable. So the point is, right, it's highly reflective and it's pretty hard to actually reason the code. So one of the other ways of writing this Hibernate access completely without any reflective access is to use some tool called as JOOQ. So I think people would have explored about this code, about this tool called JOOQ. Pretty straightforward in the sense, like what it does. Let me show you the gradle. Okay, so what it does, it actually connects to your DB, and then it will actually generate code for you instead of you writing the entities. Okay, so generating entities also is there in some of the tools actually, but we are not creating any entities here. I'll just explain what we create here. Okay, so here is the code gen area, where let's say I have a table called price data. So this is, I have three, again, forget about the red part here. I would be able to fix it. So we have three fields here: ID, price, and price date, something like that. Let's say we want to imagine to save this data somewhere, which after we are cleaning the data. So for the data source point of view, use something simple as Hickory CP. Even the normal Spring Boot uses mostly Hickory inside internally. So you can use one of the Hickory connection pooling and then connect with your database. And let's say we want to do a repo kind of an application. Okay, so we are going to let's say take last 10 days of price data, something like that. Let's imagine that. Okay, so what you can create something that's known as a DSL context, and then you supply the connection pool inside, and then you say the dialect is as Postgres. Okay, so from here you can actually use like a SQL-like workflow to actually get the data. So what you're saying is a select price data, where price is between data date is between your days, between let's say 10 days and now, and you fetch this record into my Pojo. So it's as simple as it. Okay, so this is completely can be written. This is again what we are written in this code is again use SQL. Okay, so the other extra linguistic thing which we do is to map everything as a Pojo, and Pojo is not actually your SQL table workflow. Actually, the SQL table workflow completely is different. It's a full-fledged SQL language. So instead of using the SQL language, we use extra linguistics again stuffs with Hibernate. And again, finally, you write what you end up writing is writing this at query interface. Okay, so you just people who have worked in Spring Boot will be so home with that actually. Instead of doing the writing your query, or you use native queries finally and then stuff data into it reflectively, you can actually use the actual SQL in a very DSL context. So let's say select that, fetch, and then put it into your actual record, actual Pojo which you want to send it out. Okay, so there is, and if you want to create a transaction, just create within this without any complication, so that you don't need to worry about when my Pojo gets into a transaction, it might behave differently. When my Pojo is out of the transaction, then say Hibernate context is not available. So all these things can be done in a more logical way. So this is a completely stack itself is completely different way of writing code, which is safe, non-reflective, and what do you say, code of the future, I would say. So yeah, so this is the tools you can use actually. There is a, as I said, for the J-Link is the J-Link badass plugin, and there is a Gradle plugin for JOOQ is there. CodeGen can be directly supported within that, and then IntelliJ is quite supportive of all this thing. It will all work together without any issues. So that's how that's almost the end of my presentation, where I'm taking you to look at the problems of stuffing their values into it, serialization issues, and how we can write non-reflective code from scratch. Okay. Any questions?
We had a lot of questions. One was that, okay, Verghese had made a point that when we're talking about dependency injection, then he's saying that module dependency is enforced both during compile as well as runtime. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yes. So model dependencies are always enforced both inside. That's why I have an issue with my compiler. It says it's something wrong in it. Okay, so it shows me a compile warning also, and also it doesn't let you to compile in the first place, and the security is always checked in the runtime also.
Okay. Regarding the paper on serialization, I have pasted the link in the chat, but Srinivasan, if you would confirm that, it would be good.
Give me a second. Yeah, that's the CR Brian Goyet's Amber serialization. Yeah.
Okay. And there are a couple of questions from Satish and Sanjay. Satish, you would like to unmute yourself and discuss the question?
Interesting point, actually. We had some discussion about this in comparing ORM frameworks. I'm also working on one of the papers. But this JOOQ is not open source, correct?
JOOQ for certain things are open source in the sense like you can do Postgres. Certain things are open source. Certain drivers are not open source again. But again, from the logical point of view, the support is pretty good. And also, even doesn't work. There is another tool called Speedment also. But just the idea of getting away from reflective ORMs is just what I discussed. Maybe we could discuss whether JOOQ is the answer or some other tool is the answer.
But the problem, I mean, idea is not JOOQ actually. You are correct actually. That's what it is. So there are a lot of other frameworks also. I'm working on one of the open source project. I put the link also there. Probably in some time I'll do the demo on that. But the idea is we need to get away from this reflective access actually. That's the point.
Yeah.
But it's very difficult to convince people because people consider Hibernate is good because it is mature. It's not about maturity. It's about what we go towards. We go more about doing everything at the compare time, not at runtime.
So that's the problem is, right, like if people realize their daily workflow, right, again they end up writing native queries or they end up writing add query. Why do you want to write add query if you are Pojo is doing every damn work, right? So so that's the whole point. Either you write SQL or you don't use a completely ORM model. So that doesn't work in the real world. So Hibernate is of the 90s code and it should remain in the 90s. It should not even come to the 2000s actually, but it's still there. Yeah, that's how.
The problem is, I'll tell you, this is a very delicate answer. The people who are used to JPA, right, they will just think SQL only in that syntaxes. It's very hard to explain them that today's SQL is very different from the SQL that you imagine. First of all, mapping your SQL as object itself is not valid because SQL is much bigger than object orientation.
Yes. So that's one thing. It's completely extra linguistic, right? You use the language of SQL instead of actually using the language of object, Pojo object. That's also that the object graph is something different compared to what is in SQL. They're not even, there is completely impedance. There's total impedance. Like the point is, right, the speedment is also something I've tried before. Even I've tried that actually. It's very similar actually. It will also generate the code for you from connecting to your DB, and very similar, something very similar like this. You can use even the streams internally also. But what I'm saying is, right, like even Speedment is not very popular. I'm not seeing a JOOQ. I see some certain people using it, but still the world is in Hibernate. That I don't know why it's so sticky. I don't know why Spring Boot is also so sticky.
Yes.
Okay, there was another question. Sorry, Satish, are you done or was there anything missing?
Done. Yeah, I'm done. Thanks.
Yeah, there's another question, which was that Sanjay asked this question that he's asking that how about Spring data JDBC versus JOQ?
The point is right. Like again, you can use JDBC directly or Spring Data or something like that. But this is again a different way of looking at things. That's it. It's simple. You can use the Spring way to do fill up the reflective way of filling up data into it. But this is just a different way of doing it. That's it.
Here another question, an example of evil JSON text
Yeah,
which cause an issue during serialization. If you could,
I would actually maybe search for it and send you. I don't have one thing prepared.
okay, and Verghese had another question on the query DSL. So okay, he uses query DSL, which also generates code and provides DSL for querying. So what's your take on?
But query DSL, I'm not sure whether it operates over the Hibernate, right? If I'm correct, or it operates independently.
So I'm using it over Hibernate.
Yeah, but can you do it without the Hibernate?
I not tried it yet.
Yeah.
But
So the point is right, like I think query DSLs are stuff like which we want, which you look at the Hibernate as the default problem, and then try to solve it writing over DSLs over that actually. So instead of that, why you want to use reflective way of doing stuff directly write SQL in a proper way? That's the whole point of.
so I've seen a discussion between the both the maintainers of Query DSL, and so this is after we made the shift to Query DSL. So I've seen a discussion on Reddit by the maintainers of Query DSL, and I think Lucas Eder is the maintainer for Juke.
Okay.
And Query DSL has been sort of, they've declared it as feature complete, and there is no further development going on for Query DSL. Whereas in Juke, they are still continuing development, and yes, there are these problems with, like, it's not completely open source. There are some support models and all, so that is one issue.
That is one of the issue with JOG even I saw, because it's not kind of complete open source and just maintenance patches and other stuff. But the problem what I want to say, what I'm seeing is right, like the only thing you should be really careful while writing SQL is right. You should not produce SQL injection. Okay, so that's the reason why we use any tools over writing directly SQL, say SQL code. Otherwise, you can even write SQL. I don't know why it became a bad pattern actually. But the problem why it became a bad pattern, because people introduced say SQL injection without using prepared statements or something like that, and then they can take the data and then directly send to the database, and then all kinds of security issues came actually. So one of the tools you need to use, but the best tool I would say is to go via DSL approach, which gives you the security of not writing plain SQL, and at the same time it gives you a logical way of solving problem rather than stuffing data into the entities. And then the problem with the entity is not only stuffing data, because it depends on the context, right? You put it in a transaction begin, the same POJO behaves in a very different way. When you say get inside the transaction, it's a different it's a different mechanism. They say the get outside the transaction, it just gets you a null. Okay, so if you do it inside the transaction, it will give you some hybrid exception. Okay, so again, that's the problem with Hibernate. It's maybe there's not a.
It's an SQL. It needs a SQL context.
Yeah.
To function properly. Otherwise, it's different modes basically, detached modes and other things.
Yeah, detached modes and other stuff. So the point is that these are all people can actually understand it over the time. People work with it, understand, gain knowledge about that. But the problem is right. It's always extra linguistic. It's not intuitive while just you're reading at the board. Nobody even right now when they do code review cannot figure out whether that part of the POJO is somewhere outside the transaction and it's getting called. So that cannot be unless people have some eagle eyes. It's pretty hard to deduct it within the POJO itself. And also another concept, if people have written test-ng code, right? Like with data JPA test actually. So during data JPA test, what happens, right? Automatically the transaction gets created while creating the test itself. So everything works in the test, but when you ship the code, it will not work because the transaction context is that at the starting itself. So yeah.
Sorry, there are a couple more questions. One from Sanjay. If you could read it out and have a look, Srinivasan.
Okay, any idea of other language handle JSON serialization? The why there is a constant CV is only Golang. Okay, yeah. The problem with Jackson, I'm not an expert in Golang, and I'm not sure how they are internally dealing with the serialization part actually. But the problem with the Jackson is the way the internal serialization model is built, where we stuff data into the POJO. So that's the real problem. That's an internal problem. So the Jackson parser cannot do anything about it. It can write more defensive code to save against the external world. That's it. So, and also most of the other, see again, Golang might also have CVEs, but the point is really exploitability, right? People are exploiting Java-based application more, right? So, and also they're doing more static analysis over Java applications. So that's also there. So most of the static tools also will always figure out whether there is a source. It does a source to sink analysis and then see whether a SQL injection happens or like some improper insecurity serialization is happening, something like that only. But again, very complicated issues like let's say somebody picks up the class variable from your code. Nobody could even static cannot detect it. Somebody has to actually manually look into it and then see there's a problem or an exploit should have happened. And then, okay, people write defensive code against it, publish as CVEs, and then use tools like what we build, run it in your pipeline to see whether my code is secured against that kind of injection.
So just on this topic of using Spring Boot, so even after the JPMS being introduced into the JDK, hasn't Spring already implemented modules in their system?
So Spring can implement. See, again, the point is that Spring is built a completely reflective way. Okay, so the antithesis of modules is reflection. Okay, so you can't load classes anywhere from anywhere. So that's the whole point of module system, right? Like that's the Spring is completely against it. So it can be modularized in the sense like, oh, I'm only requiring this. I'm not requiring other things. Okay, maybe I'm depending only on certain things. But the reflection part of it cannot be doing anything. Maybe it could write a nice module info saying that I'm requiring only Java base or Java SQL or like maybe this certain other things. But it cannot do this. Okay, so it cannot do any reflective guard against it because reflection is completely open.
So what
actually it's open in the sense it's not a bad idea because the engineers of JDK has left it open in the sense like if you for especially frameworks like Spring actually stopped working in JDK 9 and then it was a last minute maybe like before like 6-month release they came up with a plan of opening certain things. So you can also use something like open module. Okay, so there is another keyword called open. So when you say opens, right, open, and I can say command com.cg outlier maybe input.impl. Okay, so I can just open this package. So if I open this package means it is not available for compilation, but I could reflectively load classes within this.
I think just goes back to the main that JDK always tries to ensure backward compatibility.
No, it's backward compatibility. Again, see, it's Java 9 is released maybe like 4 years back, right? Like nobody has moved away from Spring, right? So the entire world works on Spring even right now, right? So the point is like it's kind of a stickiness problem, and the whole point of JDK, as even Vaibhav knows properly, it actually supports two type of people. A person who wants to really do something correct, really write something new, can also be supported by JDK, which what we are trying right now. And let's say I want to get my job done and keep my code running also, that's also supported in JDK. Okay, so the both tracks are supported.
So just continue on that. So other than Spring Boot, I know Micronaut tries to do away with all sort of reflective access.
Yeah.
Is there any other framework which doesn't do reflection?
Only Micronaut I see, which could actually be a drop-in replacement for Spring. But other than that, you could use. Other than that, you should be able to venture out in this type of service loader stuffs or Quarkus. Like I think there are new frameworks which could actually do that. But the thing is that if you don't want a drop-in framework, we could write something like this also. So which is completely modular. You can ship it within 30-40 MB inside your IoT device or something like that. So you could write it something like this also. So again, micro frameworks, like there is Spark Java is there. There's a very micro framework which could handle the web part, and you can use JOOQ for the backend DB access part, and then use service loader itself. Like what the 90% of our logical genius does is just write for one implementation for an interface, right? That's what we do, and then we use Spring to auto-wire it, right? You can auto-wire with this itself, right? That's simple. So that's something we could think of while writing modular applications for minimal environment. Like I don't want to say I have all the memory in the world, these are all ideal applications for lambda based environment. So I am writing a complete server with Pojo access, with the DB access, and then just spinning it from a lambda instance. Instead of that, see, if you actually build a full Java Docker, it will cross 800 MB, damn sure. Okay, so any production implementation Docker with the JDK will cross around 800 MB. So this you can ship it with an Alpine container or something like that, and it could do the job.
Are you referring to the image size, or are you referring to the memory usage?
The Docker file. So exe would go around 300 MB, 350 MB total along with the JDK, and the Docker file will go minimum around 400, 500 MB. So you will end up with a 700 MB file for Docker file, Docker image.
Just
Which is sorry. Go ahead.
I want to have, like, if there's anyone else has a question, I can pause. I have one more question.
Yeah, go ahead. Please.
I think with the I think there have been changes in the Java giving the compiler interfaces where you can sort of wire in your own annotation processors and all of that. So can we not, using those, generate the classes for the annotations and reduce all of these complexities at compile time itself? I've seen an example of a couple of them, although I'm not sure whether it's actually in this.
So I'm not sure, like from annotation, you can do code gen, in the sense like if you typically look at annotations, right? Instead of class gen, you can do code gen actually. So a free builder is a very important tool where you can actually add free builder and then write an interface, and then it could completely build you the setters and getters. So that's how you can use annotations actually, and that's one of the things people use annotations for. But what else is the concept actually you're looking at?
Okay. Maybe I think I got this question. Who asked this question? Who asked this question?
That was me, Varghese.
Anuj. So your question is, even if it is JPA, when you do @query, they do something at runtime. Why don't they do it at the compile time? That is your question, right? Build time.
Yeah, correct.
Okay. So there are tools that is coming in for not just for this area, for every area. For example, if I understand Quarkus works in that way, JOOQ works in that way for JPA. So maybe we talked about Spring a lot, right? Spring internally uses reflection. That is one of the consideration we had. There is very similar dependency injection framework called Google Dagger.
Yeah.
Okay. If you look at Google Dagger, if you use Google Dagger, if you annotate, you can see in your target generated sources folder, it will generate some source code. Basically, it will do DI, but right at the compile time.
Yeah.
So there are frameworks that is coming in which
look at here, right?
Frameworks that are,
so most of the annotations and compile time works here. Okay, so generated code. Okay, so and I think that's the way to go about using annotations. Annotations should not be used for actually doing reflective work, rather than use it as a program directive to write code gen out of it actually.
But I think here you have a step in your Gradle which will automatically do this conversion, right? This doesn't use the compiler interface for.
Come again?
So this code which is generated in your generated folder,
Yeah.
this comes through a plugin, through a Gradle plugin a Gradle
Yeah.
disk which
Yeah.
does the compilations, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So but again, once it code generated, it's again compiled, right? Like
It is
so,
compiled. Yes. It is.
go to the compile phase, and then you get all your security of what your compiler gives.
Correct.
So it's not doing some magic at the runtime, right? So.
Okay, this is an interesting question, Srinivasan, and I think you are much better placed to respond to this. There's a
Yeah.
question from the audience is that, sometimes organization are focusing too much on CVEs, and the view is that not every CVE can be exploited.
Yeah, I would continue that. I saw that question actually. The point is right. CVEs can be exploited or not depends on the way on the place you write the application, and it's very dependent on. Let's say tomorrow you move your application to some other else, it will be completely exploitable. Okay, so we are writing most of our applications sits behind the firewall. There's no issue with that, but the same code base runs in some other place, it will be exploited. So again, that's the problem. Explainability is one of the issue, right? Whether you can exploit it or not, that's another problem. So when you use tools like Sneak or whatever the Veracode gives you, right? So typically what we actually give the data is that whether the CV can be exploitable or not also. So the security engineer, security management there can actually take a call whether I could exploit this or just bump the version. So let's say common beans util is some of the problem which we faced actually. So we used a CSV reader, and the CSV reader was using the common beans utils. So common beans utils, again, our source code itself stopped working in the sense like you upgrade to 1.9.4, otherwise I'm not going to work. So the point is right, whether you want to upgrade, that's a one question. Whether you can actually kick reflective framework out of the class path also, right? So you don't need to worry about it. You can ship this code in Lambda, you can ship this code in IoT, you can ship this code behind the firewall. Nothing, no, it cannot be exploited because there is no common builds in my class path at all. Is as simple, right? So the point is right, when you write mitigations to your security group, it also always the mitigation is on the context of where you deploy. So that's why people are always worried about CVEs in the sense like if you sometimes tomorrow the DevOps guy comes and changes this deployment, some setting somewhere, put the applications run somewhere else, it's completely vulnerable. It's as simple as it. And the point, yeah. So and see, if you are writing, that's what the whole point of this exercise is to not depend on traditional frameworks which are very vulnerable to CVs. Okay, so CV is getting created, so you don't need to upgrade your code, you don't need to keep checking your code, so write safe code in the first place. So that's the whole thesis here.
I think that's a very, very
CVs generally have a severity warning, and management usually takes a call on what sort of severities we want to fix versus what we can probably live with for some time.
Yeah, so that is the call everybody takes actually. But the point is right, this if you write code in a safer way, you can reduce the stress on the security organizations also, because see, security organization in any company has to go through every applications, they have to audit it. That's why people use tools like Veracode or like Sneak or like White Source. They actually try to automate this stuff. So most of our automation also works like this actually. What we do in the sense like if you want to upgrade to the next version, right? We figure out whether the version is actually broken or not, and if the upgrade of, let's say you do the upgrade, whether your code will break or not, and recommend versions according to it. And then we do auto PR and all the other stuff we do. Tools do it. Tools helps you to do it in a lot of sense, but you have to pay for it. And most of the tools are paid. There's no open source tool doesn't do a nice job, especially in security area, because it will give you so many invalid data. You will not able to fix anything. So security is all about accuracy, right? So if I'm giving you 100 CVs, nobody has the time to fix all the 100 CVs in my code. Actually, I should be accurate, and at the same time, the security organizations also take a call to prioritize what needs to be fixed. And when the coding itself is actually moving away from this type of vulnerable areas where bad things can happen, you will reduce the load of CVEs. While reducing the load of CVEs, the security ops team load also will be reduced. And overall, there will be a fine organization where actually they only really care about important bugs.
Okay, following up on a question on this, a lot of the enterprise applications, which are, even if we talk about enterprise products, which are written in Java, one of their biggest challenges either they have to write build their own, what do you say, custom libraries, or if they decide to use anything open source, then they will always run into this constant cycle of, checking CVs and upgrading them.
Yeah.
So, if now the example which you have shown us today, that obviously talks about, how do we build secure code by default instead of depending on frameworks or anything else. But there are certain scenarios where you can't have a capability provided without the library. So how does
That's what I say. Choose non-reflective libraries. So the whole point of this thesis of this presentation, right? Let's say you want to write a code where you want to download some things in your server and then send it, okay, or sync it, okay. Use the default HTTP client. Why do you want to use REST client? Or why do you want to touch Apache some HTTP client? Because Apache HTTP client, who knows what is vulnerable is. So the point is, right, use the built-in tools as much as possible. And when you are using external tools, make sure the mechanism in which how the external tools are built, whether it's completely reflective, it is going to sit in a class bar and then read all my data, or if it's going to behave in a more sensible manner.
And so whenever you pick a library, also you have to go and look into the source code, preferably if it's an open source library, and try to understand how it is reading. That also becomes paramount.
That is actually that's again, you can't do everything in the world. So that's sometimes the POM audit. So security group or the senior engineers in the group should actually take the role of auditing the POM files. So when somebody adds something into the POM file, the first security engineering anyway will actually say whether there is no CVE or not. But the other thing, what the POM files, the engineers can do is whether you require to add this in the first place. Whether you can write a very simple code to write a CSV parser rather than, so this is a very simple CSV parser, right? Nothing, 3 lines of code. Okay, it might not read the entire, all the complexity of the CSV file. Maybe it cannot read some CSV files, but if that's the only my requirement, I'm able to control my input, right? Or why you want to really invest in a CSV file which might have some vulnerability? That is something you can try. The other one is, right, other things we are currently building something like that actually, and also there is a good open source tool built by our I'll try to share the link actually. I'll share the link later in the meetup group. So what you can actually score open source libraries by their security compliance, security fixes and other stuff. So we are building internally also, and there is another tool which is built by our ex-colleague Artem, who is actually working right now in SAP SAP actually. So they built an open source tool which will actually rank the libraries in their security awareness, in this whether they are more secure, they are daily committing. See, the other simple thing, right, like Joda time. How many people have Joda time in the cluster? They might have a lot of people have in the cluster, but Java time actually replaced Joda time. So it's an unmaintained library. So we should be very sure that we are not using unmaintained libraries. We are very sure we should be using we are using libraries which are actively getting fixed, and see how the security, they are publishing the security, because we collect all the data internally, and also we are building features on that actually. So, but again, it's all paid features. So open source, there is one thing I'll send you a link later. It's been built by SAP actually.
I think some of what you're alluding to is how is more of the DevSecOps sort of things, where
Yes.
you have to bring all of this into your pipeline, and you
Yes.
have to make sure each build runs your tests, runs your verification code, etc.
So our tools actually, most of the security tool, including our tool, sits in the pipeline only. And there are tools even you could build it as IDE plugins, where when I select the dependency file which I want to create in Gradle or Maven, it can warn me that it's an unmaintained library. Don't even try to add it.
I think we in our organization we use the Snyk tool for a lot of this.
We are the biggest competitors to Snyk, and we are trying every day how to beat. But actually, the data what we provide is better than Snyk. But the point is that Veracode is like a big enterprise thing. It's not doesn't really target the consumers actually. So Snyk is
Snyk
having
is the one which is which supports virtual jug, right? SYNK, right? If I'm not
yeah.
wrong. Okay.
I
So
think, I
there's
think,
another. Sorry,
I think
sorry,
the,
Varghese, go on.
the person who runs the virtual jug, I forget his name, he is now part of Snyk.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Docker has that's the problem with the sales guys actually. So we are positioning sales guys not part of my job description. Above my pay grade job.
No, okay, this brings us another question, which was thinking. See, we spoke about libraries and we spoke about code, but there's another aspect there that how is the data flowing into
Yeah,
our application, which is where,
that's
for example, the CSV file which we are talking about, that itself could be a source of vulnerability.
yeah.
Now, as a part of application development, validating the data also
Yes,
falls into the realm of programming. We can't say
yes,
that no, I'm not responsible for validation.
yes.
So but how should
It's Veracode.
a programmer approach this aspect? So because we've covered libraries, we've covered the coding approach or coding paradigm, let's say.
So the point is right. The data flow analysis simple, right? Like when you have to analyze the source to sink. When I give an example, right? So I'll give you a simple data flow analysis problem. Let me try to share this. Okay. So what I do a defensive copy here, right? It's simple. I'm guarding against the external value. So every data flow analysis tools like Veracode does the beautiful static engine Veracode has. I think a lot of other people like HP45 and static analysis tools are very expensive also in 45 HP and Findbugs also does that. Findbugs is the open source tool, but it's not very accurate. You can't do it for production application there. But all these things, what it helps, it sees the flow analysis, just the constructor call graph from the source to the sink. Okay, so if this is the sink and my external value is my source, right? It goes through the entire call graph and analyzes whether what are the problems it can happen. So if I have a defensive copy, then it will say. If I don't have a defensive copy, it says, oh, you are just taking the input and then doing something else. So that is the problem. Static. Actually, that's why people put money in static analysis tool. Yeah, so they have to, and mostly people does it. So mostly the banks and the big orgs which have compliance and regulation work buy static tools to actually fix these things.
Okay, yeah, that helps. Yeah, I understand. So yeah, kind of they plug one part of the cycles with using static
Yeah.
analysis.
So the point is that there are two parts in security. Security is always three parts. So one is actually your own code, which is the problem, which is the static analysis tool. But what we explained is your own code problem. You are not handling the input properly. The other one is the third party code problem. That is the composition analysis part. The fourth part is the runtime. Actually, runtime, whether you are actually putting the firewalls properly before accessing it, or all these things come under runtime security. So all these three aspects. And all.
Srinivasan, can I propose something? I know, like, what about giving a talk on this? Because I think a lot of people may not be aware of this tripod itself, which you just discussed.
Yeah, I can.
And explain with a bit of a context. Maybe not be code, but with a bit of context. Because I think this without this background, I know we're kind of taking a step back because we already addressed the problem. But I think it would make a very interesting, discussion.
Yeah, I could agree. I'll also ask for a pay hike for becoming the developer relation.
yeah. Anyways, becoming a part developer advocate now.
Yeah. Sorry, my video actually went out. So
Yeah, not an issue. Okay, any other question from anyone? Because I think this was really interesting, and I would like an audience, feedback also. What is your audience's feedback on having at least because obviously the discussion or the focus of the session is more on developers, making them aware of how does application security really work, and what are the aspects which you should focus on. Any feedback from the audience regarding such a session from Srinivasan?
I think it will be good to know like what other practices that are happening. We like in our firm we have the sort of practice of running pipelines and all of that, but it will be good to know what else does happen in the other companies, other firms also.
Okay.
I think we start with the the session is more of a what do you say, a 101 or a 1 or 201 session, because it sets the right context for everyone, since our audience might have different levels of background knowledge, and then we can build to a certain extent given the time and the availability of information.
So we could actually go through these concepts of static algorithm analysis, like how composition analysis works. That also we could take, because entire security workflow works like that actually, from application security point of view actually. And also we could discuss other types of security like container security. All these things could be could be done. Yeah, but I have to ask for a developer relation role.
Well, that we can obviously write to testimonials for it based on the session.
Yeah. Sure.
Okay, cool. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, Girish is also saying it would be good to know the foundations and the context. So yeah, I think that's what do you say? At least a couple of
But if I want to represent Veracode, I can check with my check with my peers, and because this is again, I'm not representing Veracode. I'm just giving a general talk on a general topic on a user group actually. So because if some certain features really go back to the tool itself, right? I can't say I'm completely independent of bias or whatever the tool which I have, because I work for it. Okay, so that's something we could discuss. See what else we can add, and yeah, any other forum also, or this for Java users group also I could do it. Yeah.
I would say in two parts. So then that gives Veracode also some benefits. So it's like this: we do one basic session where we talk about container security a bit, and like keep it basics. Don't get any specific Veracode specific thing. And then once you have some kind of official confirmation, then we could do a more in-depth session, which is more like what other organizations are doing, what other security practices others are following. That way you can obviously, we'll be happy to what do you say, put a bit of a promotion on Veracode. I'm honestly calling that out because otherwise it becomes difficult to what do you say, make it because once you get into more details, you have to bring in a bit of tool level details to that.
Yeah, so tools are important, but again, all the tools, I just want to give some disclaimer, especially security tools are all paid. There is not a lot of free tools which you can actually use it for things, because the data collection is so manual. Nobody could actually support. So we do so many engineering work behind to actually say this jar as the CV. Okay, so it's not so straightforward actually. So most of the tools are paid actually. So that's, I just want to give a disclaimer. So if I want to explain about Sneak or like Veracode, it cannot be completely unbiased. That's what I want to say.
Yeah, absolutely fine. Acha, just a couple of things. I'll just make a quick announcement before. We are doing hosting a joint session with Microsoft Reactor Bangalore with on Java on Azure, or rather Azure Java Days. So we have quite a few topics. So anybody who's working on Azure or would like to explore Azure and how Java, how the Azure ecosystem is helping Java developers, they can obviously go and respond to the call for papers. I'll just paste the call for papers link right now for everyone on the chat, and you can obviously go, and I have dropped a mail also. It's also published on our meetup for the 21st of May. So I would request everyone to at least have a look. If the CFP interests you, please do go and apply for it. And it is mainly Java, and it's on a lot of topics. So it's not just restricted with, it's like containers are there, orchestration frameworks are there, Azure apps are there, everything is there. It's a bit Azure focused. I agree to that. So anybody who's working on Azure, who wants to explore Azure, who's trying to look at taking Azure for a spin, can go and check out the CFPs. And if you have any other topics in mind from the ones which are listed out, you can reach out to me or Vivek, and we'll be happy to listen to you and see if we can fit that in. That's one thing. Second thing was, there's another question from Sanjay Srinivasan, and I'll read out the question. I'll add my 2 pence on it, and then I'll let you address it. So Sanjay's question was that if he understands that a particular CVE is very hard to exploit given the environment the application is deployed, the way the data of the application is being accessed, he could have a discussion with his security team on that, this CV does not deserve the priority it is assigned to fixing.
Yeah, obviously you can do it actually, because let's say you run any application, you'll have a bunch of CVEs which is coming out actually, and then you can prioritize whether there is high risk vulnerability. But the every CV, if you look at an NVD database, right, that has our actual exploitability score. So the exploitability score is designed in such a way that whether that will be in a common development environment, it will be exploitable or not. So that is the exploitability score. Only that high risk vulnerabilities you need to go and fix it in first place. Okay? You can't fix every vulnerability, but if the high risk vulnerability is also, that's the security workflow in any organization will happen. If the high risk vulnerability also, you can say that it's not going to happen for me. You have to write a mitigation to your. Come again.
Sorry, Srinivas, just 1 second.
Just mute. Yeah. So if the high risk vulnerability is also not going to affect you, you have to write a note to your security engineer saying, write a mitigation note, and that's a complete workflow every security SecOps does actually. So it's if you really feel that's there is no worth of time spending in fixing that, you have to write a mitigation to your security engineer, and he has to take a call whether he's going to take the risk or not.
Yeah, that's a fair thing.
So that's how the workflow happens actually. In general, there will be a security security engineer who actually sets the quality for that application. Let's say he understands certain things about it. He's going to face the external world, and then he will say, "I should be 90%. No issues are there." So if he feels that, then if you have some issues, then you could write a mitigation saying that it's not going to happen. If you accept it, then if it's okay, and all these tools provides this. That's one of the two. Veracode actually does the work for this. Actually, it could sell you. It could be the interface between your security engineer and you actually. So a lot of other tools does it actually.
Okay, that's thanks for that.